Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya Ali Madad. On behalf of ITREB Portugal, Spain, and Angola, we welcome you to this book launch session. We would like to thank the Institute of Ismaili Studies for making this event possible. This session is also being recorded at the Aga Khan Center, London, home of the IIS. The Aga Khan Center is a building designed to represent the values of openness, dialogue, and respect for different viewpoints. A treasure for those wanting to understand more about Muslim civilizations, our history. Today's author, who will be in conversation with Zohora Pirbhai, is Wazir Shams Vellani. Wazir Shams is an example of generosity and service for the Jamaat. He has recently written a book entitled People of Faith, Essays on a Historical and Contemporary Profile of the Ismailis, which will be the topic of their discussion. Let me first introduce Zohora before I introduce Wazir Sahib. Zohora Pirbhai from Lisbon, Portugal, has a bachelor's degree in literature. She graduated from Institute of Ismaili Studies in London, from the graduate program in Islamic Studies and Humanities, GPISH. She also holds an MSc in Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies from Edinburgh. Before joining ITREB Portugal in September 2020 to become our scholar, she worked for the ITREB UK for 5 years. Overall, she counts 15 years of experience working with the Jamaati institutions, with a particular highlight to having represented the Jamaat in various interfaith and intercultural sessions. Our interviewee, with whom we have the greatest pleasure in speaking to, Wazir Shams Vellani, was born in Tanga, Tanzania. He spent his early career years as a primary school teacher in his town after having studied in Nairobi, Kenya. He graduated at the London School of Economics. His dedication to the Jamaat is a notable one, from being member of the National Conciliation and Arbitration Board in Tanzania to supporting the Ugandan Ismaili refugees in Canada. He was also important, together with some of the most prominent Ismailis, in the development of the Institute of Ismaili Studies, where he worked for 43 years, first as the executive officer and later as director of special projects. Furthermore, Wazir Shams Vellani was involved in diplomatic protocols relating to the opening of Jamaat Khanas and Ismaili Center in Tajikistan, and the establishment of the diwan, seat, of the Ismaili Imamate here in Lisbon. Amongst many other achievements, he also for the Tanzanian government and the Industrial Bank in Canada. Wazir Shams Vellani's work was recognized by Maulana Hazar Imam at a dinner on 19th October 2003, marking the IIS's 25th anniversary, where Hazar Imam referred to Wazir Shams as a valiant soldier and a wise intellect. We hope Maulana Hazar Imam's statement, together with today's session, whets your appetite for wanting to read this wonderful book. Wazir Shams Vellani, thank you for your time and for joining us.
Thank you.
Yali Madad, everyone.
Alali Madad.
It is a pleasure to be part of this book launch and to be having this conversation with Wazir Shams Vellani, the author of the book, People of Faith, Essays on a Historical and Contemporary Profile of the Ismailis. Mr. Vellani played a key role at the inception of the Institute of Ismaili Studies that has celebrated its 43rd anniversary on the 25th of November 2020. The Institute of Ismaili Studies has inspired many generations of the Jamaat and continues to do so, whether it is through its academic programs or the short courses, academic research and publication, or through the religious education international programs for both primary and secondary. I myself have graduated from the Institute of Ismaili Studies on the occasion of its 25th anniversary where Maulana Hazar Imam said in his speech, while referring to the message of Islam, and I quote, "This message is still potent in the Muslim world today, although it is sometimes clouded, distorted, and deformed by political interests and by struggles for power over the minds and hearts of people. There are attempts at transforming what are meant to be fluid, progressive, open-ended, intellectually informed, and spiritually inspired traditions of thought into hardened, monolithic, absolutist, and obscurantist positions. Yet, there are many across the length and breadth of the Muslim world today who care for their history and heritage, who are keenly sensitive to the radically altered conditions of the modern world. They are convinced that the idea that there is some inherent permanent division between their heritage and the world of today is a profoundly mistaken idea, and that the choice it suggests between an Islamic identity on the one hand and, on the other hand, full participation in the global order of today is a false choice indeed. They seek for ways in which their societies may benefit from the intellectual and material fruits of modernity while remaining true to their distinctive moral, spiritual, and cultural heritage." End of quote. This book, People of Faith, reflects this care for our heritage that Maulana Hazar Imam talks about, bridging past and present, looking into the future. This book also resonates the idea that in the Ismaili Tariqa, there is no division between our Islamic identity and the world that we live in today. Quite the contrary, our heritage inspires the way we live in the world today. In his book, Mr. Vellani talks about distinctive features of the Ismaili Tariqa and how these have remained central to the community across time. We are deeply honored to have you here today with us, Mr. Vellani. Welcome to this interview.
Thank you.
So at the start of this interview, and as it was mentioned before, you were someone who was instrumental in the creation of the Institute of Ismaili Studies. And as we celebrate the 43rd anniversary of the IIS this month, can you begin by reflecting back to those early days and sharing your experience with us? What would you say was the vision and the driving motivation of Maulana Hazar Imam for the establishment of the Institute? And what was it like to be part of that vision and work at the IIS 43 years ago? And what has been like to have this 4-decade career with the Imamate institutions as they have evolved and grown?
It's a very deep and broad question, very difficult to answer in a couple of minutes. You could write a book on this. Now, it's a humbling privilege to have been part of that experience, because working directly under the guidance of the Imam of the time is a privilege that you cannot describe. You will learn a lot. You learn a great deal. You can earn 10 PhDs just under the guidance of the Imam. And about the vision of the Imam, I think the best person to speak about the vision of the Imam is the Imam himself. Read the Tariqa he sent in 1977 when he inaugurated formally the Institute. I said formally because the work of the Institute had gone apace long time before that. You'll find detailed resolutions in the 1975 conference, Ismaili Association Conference, when Hazrat Imam met the leaders of the Jamaat and some leading scholars, and he explained to them his vision there. I think in the Tariqa board, you may have a copy of the resolutions of the 1975 conference, but that vision goes much further than that. I remember, for instance, I read a firman when I was in Karachi, Pakistan, visiting the Tariqa, what was then Ismaili Association in 1976. I met with Wazir Alwais Kasmali, which is popularly known as Kasmali missionary, an international figure of wisdom. He shared with me the firman of the Imam when he visited the Ismaili Association, met the leaders and scholars, and he emphasized that if you want to learn properly the history and doctrines of the Ismailis, we must have access to primary sources, not to rely on secondary sources, but look first at what we, our own scholars, our own dais, our own philosophers have written about us, the history and so on. Because in the past, many distortions on our history and doctrines happened because people read about us from material written by our enemies, our distractors. And our enemies created a number of legends about us. Okay. I mean, there is much to speak, but inshallah, during the conversation, we'll have some opportunities to refer to this.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. So moving on to our next question, your book starts with a short and very interesting biography that your colleagues at the IIS have put together. I read that you were born and educated in Tanzania, and then you later came to London and studied at the London School of Economics. Could you please speak about your formative years and how these early experiences and education may have inspired you to write this book?
The inspirations for the book came when I started working under the guidance of the Imam. And many questions were referred to me, so I learned how to prepare answers, liaising with people who knew much more about the history of Ismailis, the doctrines. My academic background is economics. I studied economics, but I used to read. My simple learning was looking at the firmans of Hazrat Imam, Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah, and the traditions of earlier Imams. Simple but very wise, background on that basis. And learning from the elders of the family of the Jamaat, you learn a lot from elders. I'm not saying that because I'm an elder now you learn from me, but I learned from my elders. So that was, and I used to teach. When I completed my secondary school education, while waiting for an admission to go to a college, I worked at the Aga Khan school as a dharmic teacher. Dharmic means a religious teacher.
Yes.
Or not religious teacher, but teacher of religion.
Yes.
So, and I enjoyed that, teaching religion. So that was also an event which introduced me into this service. And I responded. I think I think in biography they've covered it.
Yes.
Somebody, a politician, said something not very complimentary about us and about other Asians. And I in that speech, in the presence of a politician who was an Ismaili, and many young people, I without being afraid of whoever the politician might have been, the truth we cannot be afraid of truth. It must be stated that our history, especially our modern history in the last 100, 200 years, has been an exemplary experience for others to learn from us. We have learned from others, but others to also learn from us of how self-sufficient, self-reliant the community is. When the government is not able to provide services, the Imam helps us to fend for ourselves, our education services, health services. So that was for me to be able to write that in a paper at a seminar organized by the council, gave me an opportunity to think how to get involved in Jamati service. And I served as a member of what was then called Provincial Tribunal, which is now today CABE, Conciliation Arbitration Board. So these were some of the stepping stones, if you like, of getting interested. And when I went to Canada, I was working for the Industrial Development Bank in Canada, and the leadership asked me at that time, it was 1974, if I could resign from the bank and join a program to help the newly arrived Jamaats in Canada to settle and for make them bankable, if you like, and in the sense that re-establish themselves as business people after having been uprooted. And then I got a call from Saribu's office that in those days we had telexes saying that I should go to Nairobi because Hazma wanted to see me. So that was a wonderful opportunity. And that was in February 1976.
I'm sure.
When Hazma gave me guidance as to how to move forward,
yes,
indicating directions what I should do and who I should liaise with. And
yes,
that was a very privileged opportunity to hear from the Imam what he wanted for me to do to establish the institute.
Yes, thank you for sharing that, Mr. Vellani. So to a question that I was waiting to ask. So as a woman, I was so glad that you took the time to think about and to write about women in service of deen. So I would like to ask, what inspired you to dedicate a section of a chapter to the contribution of women in service of deen as members of the Ismaili Dawah? Why did you make this choice of acknowledging the service of women in your book?
If you have read anything about Islam, and especially about Ismaili Tariqa, you will know immediately that the Quran gives very high respect to women. And Quran at that time was the revolutionary text, if you like, when women were completely downtrodden, treated as chattel. The Quran, Allah gave women the right to own property, which was unthinkable in those days. Not until early decades of the last century, even in England, women had no right to own property. I think maybe last century, maybe a 19th century, they could not own property. It was not, the Christians or Western civilizations did not allow women to own property and to bequeath to anyone else, because everything belonged to the male members of the family. The Quran 1400 years ago gave women the right to own property. That's a very big thing, revolution. Now, so for an Ismaili, to speak about women in very important role is, you don't need inspiration because it's an ethos. You grow up. Now, our teachers were women. Now, teachers are leaders. So you're interacting with leaders who are women. And the Imam's guidance, Maulana Sultan Maulana's guidance. And even if you go to very early, go to the Prophet's example. His wife, Khadija, Hazrat Khadija, was a business person, and he worked for her. So, so that gives you the clue for I thought it must be acknowledged in the book. I was writing about deen, and service of deen, and women played a very prominent role. So that, if it's not an inspiration, but it was just an automatic thing to do. You cannot write about service to deen and not mention about prominent women, who were teachers of founders of madhabs, Sunni madhabs. Hanbal, Shafi, Hanafi, they all studied under some women scholars.
So thank you for sharing all of those examples in your book that I really enjoyed reading about. So we're now moving to our next question. Looking at the title of the book, People of Faith, Essays on Historical and Contemporary Profile of the Ismailis, what are the messages that you're trying to convey in this title?
Yeah, I think we live in a world today which is predominantly materialistic. And not only in the West, it is happening, the influence of the West always passes on to other countries. When materialism dominates life, people tend to forget what are the intrinsic values of human life. And religion teaches that. Even, if you look at the letters that Albert Einstein, the great scientist, wrote to his family, his daughter. Look at Newton. These people were scientists, but they were not irreligious. And today, one of the concerns people are facing now, there is now a contrary trend. There was a lot of literature trying to minimize the importance of religion. And the deficit is being felt today by thinkers, by world leaders also, that there is the spiritual deficit in daily life. And there are problems, a broken family, poverty, extreme poverty, and other problems. When religion, when ethics disappear, look at the world wars, 1, 2. People, millions killed, massacred, and it's going on. So there has been a deficit of faith in the public realm, but also in individual life. And we see a free fall of ethics when religion is set aside. So the people are now begin to realize the human institutions only survive and get strengthened if their anchors are they're embedded in ancient values, which are universal and which continue.
And you explore all of this in your book. Yes, I noticed when I read that you're anchoring everything in our history and heritage.
If I make one important point, the principle of religion, whether it is Islam or other religions, is that there is human answerability at the end. One of the fundamental articles of our faith, apart from Tawheed, Nabuwa, Imama, is Qiyamah. What does Qiyamah mean? Qiyamah is the notion of a person's answerability to God in the end. There's a higher answerability. If you don't believe in higher answerability, you become vain, and your spirituality erodes. You want to do whatever you like because you think that you are not answerable to anyone.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So that's why faith is very important. And you've
Yes.
listened to Hazmam's sermons that I want my Jamaat to be men and women of faith.
Of faith, yes.
Quite a few sermons.
Yes, yes. So now looking into the first chapter of your book, you trace a historical and contemporary profile of the Ismailis. So at the beginning of the chapter, you say, and I quote, Muslims are those who submit to God. They are a community of the middle path, of balance, of people taught to avoid extremes, to enjoin good and forbid evil, using the best of language. So you start by saying this on page 1. You then give an overview of the development of communities of interpretation in Islam, where you situate the Ismaili Tariqa. But as we know, there is also diversity within each of these communities of interpretation. So what I would like to ask is, how did you address the challenge of writing a book that will speak to a global Jamaat, given the rich diversity of traditions and contexts in which the Jamaat lives today?
May I say the first part, when you read out that quote, that whole quote is based on 4 or 5 ayahs of the Quran. I don't have time to now point out, but if you're interested, I will give them to you. Yeah.
Yes.
In all this, there's no compulsion religion.
Yes.
And quite a few other ayats. And on that basis, that paragraph is written. So it encapsulates 5 or 6 ayats of the Quran. Now, sorry, what was, you mean about diversity? No,
Yes.
in the book, I cite authorities from different traditions. There are Fatimid traditions.
Yes.
There are Alamud traditions. There are more, pre-modern Farsi literatures, scholars, Ginans. So I've looked at all this. That I've cited sources from different traditions of the Jamaat.
Yes, and that's very visible.
Let me just want to underline one point. I have been fortunate. I've been to Jamaat Khanas in Tajikistan.
Yes.
Khorog, Dushanbe. I've been to Jamaat Khana in Kabul. I've been to the Jamaat Khana in Salamia. So and many other places of India, Pakistan. And although I do not speak or understand the language, even Lisbon, I can't, because everything is sometimes in Portuguese. And Arabic, and Salamia, I didn't understand what was going on, or in Tajikistan or Afghanistan, but I felt comfortable, because
you feel that sense of connection.
I shared the ethos in the Jamaat Khana, because when speaking to a group of Khalifas in Dushanbe, I said that we are different branches, but our roots are the same. All these different diverse branches, they get nourishment from the same roots. Now our roots are the Quran, Imami and prophetic traditions, ferments of the Imams, and most important, our love, loyalty, dedication, devotion to the Imam of the time. Wherever you are, in Afghanistan, Syria, Pakistan, Africa, Canada, USA, this is the bonding principle.
Yeah.
Your love and devotion to the Imam of the time. And you'll find a couple of pages on this. What are the principles? That we all adhere to what the Imam says. We try and follow wherever we live. But the Imam says in his fermans that he looks at diversity with love and affection. He wants us to understand that Jamaat is not monolith. Like Islam as a whole, Ummah as a whole, the Jamaat itself is also diverse.
Of course.
So that is respected, but there are roots. We must not forget the common roots.
Yes, this is a very powerful idea to fully understand.
Yeah.
Yes.
And as I said, I've referred to sources from all traditions, not just one, not Ginans or not just Fatimid, but also other sources,
Yes.
which
Yes.
are familiar to Afghans, to Tajiks, to Iranians, to Syrians, to Khojas.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. As you have mentioned before, the title of the book comes from one of the chapters of this book that starts by saying, and I quote, "In the contemporary age, which is increasingly being shaped by secular tendencies, there is among the different religious traditions, including that of Islam, a realization of the serious implications of the growing dominance of materialist attitudes over religion and its ethics, which no longer provide a compass to guide the conduct of people's private and public lives." End of quote. So you spoke a little bit about this, but I wanted to ask you, what would you say to the young generations of the Jamaat who are born and raised in Western societies, like here in Portugal, and who live through this phenomenon that you have mentioned? How can they continue being people of faith? How can they carry forward the beautiful traditions that you talk about in your book?
Well, fortunately, the Jamaat provides many avenues to get to participate in the life of faith. Now, you don't have to. You're not a good Ismaili only because you come to Jamaat Khana. Coming Jamaat Khana is important, but you can say your dua at home or wherever you are. And the Imam says, apart from Jamaat Khana, do not forget that. Do not let life not be part of your life. Do not let faith be absent from your life anytime. And there are, I've quoted prophetic traditions, the Quran, and even other philosophers of other religious traditions in Islam make the same point. Given many traditions there, non-Islamic traditions, they are in resonance with what the Imam is saying. And look at yourself. You are a young person, educated, born in a Western society, tempted by this secular tendency, but you are part of a faith community. Now, there is nothing wrong about secularism. I'm not saying that we are secular. We believe in secularism. We live the secular life, and it suits us today. It's a blessing in a way that there is no imposition. The state will not say to you, you must be an atheist, or you must be a Christian, or you must be a Muslim. There's freedom, we benefit from modernity. The tremendous progress in science and medicine, technology, but we do that within the framework of the ethics of our faith. And this pandemic, there has been a tremendous rise of young people, young generations coming forward to serve. Now, serving is part of faith. Yes. And Imam has made beautiful, powerful firmans that there is no conflict between secular education and Islam. They build on each other. I mean, he has, in his public statements, I think when opening the Jamaat Khana or laying the foundation of the Dushanbe Ismaili Center, he makes this statement that they reinforce each other. Secular traditions and religious tradition they strengthen each other.
Yes, and you talk about this idea of intellect and faith, and intellect being a facet of faith. And you speak about this and in a very powerful way in your book, indeed. So
I know what will appeal to a young person, an
yes.
educated young person. When we speak about intellect, the emphasis of the Imams, right back, I've quoted a traditional Imam Jafar Sadiq. They all speak about giving importance to the ethic of intellect. And there's on page 5 or 6 a section on Imam Ali.
Yes.
And his intellect which is immersed in virtue. Now, the Prophet makes a statement that knowledge that you have, because knowledge is a very great burden. Intellect is a very great burden. And if you don't share it, if you don't believe in the ethic of it, like sharing your wisdom to serve, then it becomes a burden. It's like something around your throat. I've used some word here, because it's a burden. If you don't use it, it will strangle you. You have to use wisdom to serve others. So it's very important to understand that. And I'll just make one important point.
Yes.
The faith, Imam Ali makes a very powerful statement. Use your conscience as the seat of your judgment. You have to, your conscience has to decide what is good and bad, the value. Because what faith does is that you use your talents, your knowledge, your intellect, your material power to make a world a better place. Now, which young man or woman would not subscribe to that notion? The faith says,
yes,
listen to your conscience, follow. If your conscience cannot guide you, nobody else can guide you. The Prophet cannot guide you, the Imams cannot guide you. You
yes,
have to be guided first by your conscience.
yes.
That is your seat of judgment.
So now, speaking about another idea that you speak in your book, the deen and dunya. So in one of the essays, you look at this idea of deen and dunya. And in that essay, you say, and I quote, "For dunya is a place of transit, not a place wherein to abide." End of quote. This balance between deen and dunya is even more challenging in today's world, as you were speaking about materialism, especially living in Western contexts, even in countries like Portugal that have a very strong religious history. Can you help us understand how do you see this balance between deen and dunya being a reality in the contemporary world?
You see, in the Christian world, Islam, first of all, Islam, more than any monotheistic religion, Islam has a very strongly pronounced social dimension. You live in the world. That means you, dunya, and you practice your faith in dunya. And Islam wants Muslims to live in the world fully, without forgetting their faith. That's the meaning. This is the place of transit. Now, there's one, I give an instances. There's one beautiful instance, which is poetized by Nasir Khusro, but also I think the Sadi, or I've given the quote there. When Hazrat Ali heard somebody, around him criticizing dunya, he got angry. He said, dunya is a place where religion has been revealed. The revelation has come. It's for you to take benefit and get your harvest, rich harvest, as a provision for the life to come. So don't blame dunya. When some companions of the Prophet wanted to say that, okay, we want to now devote our lives only to Islam, Prophet said, okay, your prophet is not like that. Your prophet doesn't believe in that. He was married, he had children, he ran a business, he lived a very full life. He was the military leader, he was a religious leader, he was a politician, diplomat, statesman, but also a messenger of God. Man of faith, but a man of world also. He married, and he lived a full life. He was a businessman himself. So and Quran says that he's the best example for us to follow. And Imams are, his progeny. They followed in the footsteps of the Prophet Imam Ali. Imam Sultan says that you're not supposed to be a monk. That's what the Prophet said. He doesn't want a life of monk for Muslims. Muslims should live a full life, and this is the lesson for others to learn from us, that you be part of the world, benefit from the world. Material benefits, scientific benefits, all that modernity offers, but all that within the ethics, without giving up the ethics of the faith. The importance is values of Islam.
Yes, and as you were
in
saying
before, Hazrat doesn't say much about theology. He speaks about values of Islam, ethics of Islam. Get education, best of education, but use education to serve the family, the Jamaat, and society at large.
Yes, yes. Thank you. So we're now going to look at, again, the essay that traces the historical and contemporary profile of the Ismailis. It says, and I would like to quote, "Bridge building across cultural divides within an acceptable ethical framework is a well-established Islamic tradition," end of quote. So in this chapter, you also look at the seat of the Ismaili imamate historically, and there's also a section in the book that talks about the Ismaili diwan, now based in Portugal. It is also mentioned in your short biography that in 2005, you were involved in the negotiations for a series of diplomatic protocols, which led to the establishment of the diwan of the Ismaili imamate in Lisbon. In light of our history and traditions, what does the seat of imamate mean for the Portuguese and the global Jamaat today?
Yeah, I want to clarify one point. I was fortunate that I was given an opportunity by Ajmam to be in the task force dealing with these protocols in Portugal. But a great deal of work, most of the work was done by Wazir Nazim Ahmed, who is the Acadian representative in Portugal and also Mozambique. A great deal of work was done by him, and I worked very closely with him. And the various presidents at that time, Amir Banji, I think it was President Wazir Amir Banji.
Yes.
We all worked together, and everybody else contributed. I played a small part, and I was fortunate to have been involved in. And I'll speak about the diwan. The imamate seat is a historical notion, starting with the Prophet. Prophet was a spiritual leader, but he to serve the ummah and the world at large at that time, in his time, he had to have some locus, geographical, physical locus from where he could do his work. I mean, have emissaries go around to the religious emissaries or political emissaries to go around the world. He needed a focus. He established, he was located in Mecca, But Makkah proved very difficult for him, so he moved to Medina. Shows that he chose a place, a seat for his his reign over the Ummah, a place where it was convenient for him to run the affairs of society. And then the caliphs after him, like Abu Bakr, Omar, Osman, I think they stayed in Medina also. Hazrat Ali, when he became the Caliph, he moved to Kufa because he thought that Kufa was a better place for him from where to govern. And the other Imams maybe later on moved to Medina, and they moved to then Salamiyah. From Salamiyah, they moved to Cairo, no, Yemen first, and then Cairo. Imam Mahdi established he moved to Rakada, I think, later on, declared himself as the Caliph, the Mahdi, the Prophet's descendant, and Imam Ali's descendant, Fatima, Bibi Fatima's descendant, and established the Fatimid Caliphate. And from Rakada, the seat moved to, I think, Mahdiya, Mansuria, then Cairo. So wherever the Imam was, wherever the Imam thought that this is the locus for him to better manage his contact with his engagement with the Jamaat and with society at large. And today, the Imam decided to accept the invitation from the Portuguese Republic, Portuguese government, to establish the seat of the Imamate in Lisbon. He calls it Diwan. There is an historical connection I just pointed out. In Fatimid Empire, the seat was known as the Diwan. So Diwan has a great significance. And I just want to make one thing clear, that Diwan historically has facilitated the engagement of the Imam with the Jamaat globally and also with the external world. And since the time of the Prophet, such engagement is facilitated by the spiritual dimensions of Islam. Now, spiritual dimensions of Islam are different from hardened attitudes, based on dogma only. Spiritual dimensions are not hardened attitudes. They are more flexible. They enable a pluralistic, cooperative approach to looking at the problems of the world. And the Diwan, like the Ismaili Imamate delegations, they are there to link the Islamic, the spiritual dimensions of Islam with the values of the host societies. They're not very different from that. They're universal values.
Yes.
But they also emanate from the spirit, the scripture, the traditions, the spiritual dimensions of Islam. And this gives us the great force. The Diwan is a place where these dimensions radiate and they resonate with the society here. Now, one great thing about the seat is that in today's world, it's a paradigm for the world to learn that there is no need to have conflict between Islam and other societies. This gives an example that, look here, doesn't matter, you are a secular, so this is the first time that the Imamate has an agreement with a non-Muslim secular state, because there is no conflict. It signals to the world that there are opportunities for Muslims and secular Western states to work together.
Yes.
And look at problems in a cooperative spirit. to be able to solve problems together.
Yes.
And this is what spiritual dimensions allow us to do. They facilitate for us to, we are not hardened. We don't say, oh, dogma, we can't do this because Islam says no. Because Islam doesn't say no. And the Quran says that you're putting, giving lie to Allah's word by saying that Allah forbids this and that. So,
so you
Quran and take the example from the Prophet and from the Fatimid Empire. Fatimid Empire set up a record, a fantastic record of cooperation between Muslims and non-Muslims. And there were many more non-Ismaili, non-Muslim wazirs serving the Fatimid Empire. Although others also, Abbasids, and they learned, they made use of talent, whether it was Muslim talent or non-Muslim talent, as long as that talent was willing to serve the interests of society. So you know, this diwan has that very important signal for the world today, and the Jamaat has to understand, and it puts a tremendous burden on the Jamaat, especially in Portugal, to be exemplary murids of the Imam.
Of course.
Okay.
Thank you. So we'll probably move on to our last question. So in the chapter Men and Women of Faith, one of the chapters that has particularly inspired me, I have to say, there is one section dedicated to the ethic of intellect. I think you already spoke a little bit about this, but I wanted to say that in your chapter, we can read and quote, the Prophet would often say, the ink of the scholar is holier than the blood of the martyr, repeatedly affirming the value of knowledge. Acquire knowledge because he who acquires it in the way of the Lord performs an act of piety. End of quote. So again, many of the young members of the Jamaat in our Western societies, and mostly due to their secular education, struggle to understand this idea of intellect and faith that you refer to as a principle of Shiism. What would you say is the contribution of your book towards a deeper understanding of this idea of intellect and faith?
I think I touched on this in an earlier question.
Yes, you did.
Now,
You did. Yes, you did.
Knowledge, the Quran says that only people of knowledge fear Allah. People of knowledge, not people who are not educated, have no knowledge. Only people of knowledge fear Allah. And I've quoted that ayat in the book. Now that means knowledge is elevated by Allah, because if you have knowledge, then you understand Allah's creation. And Hazram says in his Farmans, education, the purpose of education in Islam is to study Allah's creation, which means society also, human beings are part of creation. Study society, study philosophy, study the environment, because this is all creation of. Study to understand Allah's creation so it's better to serve. See, the underlying factor is serving. Use your wisdom to serve. Use your knowledge to serve. Now, young people are serving today. You may be serving other sectors of society, but serve society. Our faith, the tariqah doesn't say don't serve others. Serve others, serve the Jamaat, serve your family, but use education as a tool of service. Now, a young person who thinks about this, there is, as Azram said, people who understand the real meaning of Islam, they do not see a conflict between secular education and religious and faith. In Islam, there has never been a conflict. The Prophet says, learn even if you have gone to China. Now, some people say that this is not an authentic hadith. Doesn't matter, because hadiths are they reflect a perception of a person's faith. Now, so if somebody manufactures a hadith to show that he believes in education, even go to China, then it's all right, because that's what matters is your perception of the faith, and so you use hadith, and you can't come to hadith. And people used to fabricate, so we have to be careful about hadith. But you know, I've quoted traditions of imams also. So do not ask. Hazrat Ali says, don't ask who said, but what is said. Doesn't matter if non-Ismaili, non-Muslim said something wise. Don't ask who said. Well, what is said. Importance is what is said. And I think Al-Kindi, an early Arab philosopher, he says that truth never abases. It always ennobles, whatever the source. You know, so knowledge serves faith, it serves society, it serves everybody.
Yes, yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Mr. Vellani. I could go on all afternoon having this conversation with you, but for the purposes of the formal webinar, we have now come to an end of this interview. I would like to thank you for this wonderful and insightful discussion, which I think will have inspired many of us to read the book. I have to tell you that personally, I benefited immensely from reading your book. I'll start reading it again. So that not only you write in a style which is very easy to read, you also attempt to address and answer many of the questions that the members of the Portuguese Jamaat ask about their own faiths. I would therefore encourage everyone to read the book, which is available via ITREB and the Ismaili Center Library. Thank you so much once again, Mr. Vellani.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I love Lisbon Portuguese Society. I've had many interactions with the leaders, and inshallah, one of these days in the future, there will be an opportunity for me to meet with these Tariqa board members and staff who serve the Jamaat in a very noble fashion, teaching. Teaching is a very noble profession, and I would love to interact with young teachers like yourselves, young educators.
Thank you. So hopefully see you soon, one day,
Inshallah.
in Lisbon.
Inshallah.
Thank you all for your participation. Obrigada. Muito obrigada pela vossa participação. Adeus e até breve.
Thank you. Yari Mudat.